The moment my son-in-law told me to stay in my lane at my own dinner table, I set down my fork, looked him dead in the eye, and smiled. He thought that smile meant I was backing down. He had no idea what it actually meant. Let me back up. I turned 63 last April. I still work, not because I have to, but because I built something worth protecting. 31 years ago, I started a small property management company in Raleigh, North Carolina, out of a spare bedroom with a used fax machine and a phone that rang maybe twice a day. By the time my daughter graduated college, that company had 32 employees and managed over 400 residential units across the Triangle. I never talked about the numbers. My wife, before she passed, always said I wore my success like a shirt. You only noticed it if you looked close. She was right. I preferred it that way. My daughter, my only child, is the kind of person who lights up every room she walks into. She got that from her mother. Sharp, funny, warm in a way that makes strangers feel like old friends inside of 5 minutes. When she was small, she used to climb into my lap while I did paperwork and help me by putting stickers on my documents. I have a lease agreement from 1998 somewhere with a rainbow sticker on page 4. I never had the heart to throw it away. She married her husband 6 years ago. I wanted to like him. I really did. He came into the picture charming and confident, the kind of man who had an answer for everything and laughed at his own jokes a half second before the punchline. He worked in marketing, or so he said. The job changed descriptions every time I asked. I noticed but said nothing. My daughter was happy. That was what mattered. The first 2 years were fine. Then they had their son, my grandson, and something shifted, not in her, in him. He started making comments about money. Subtle ones at first. Must be nice to have that kind of cushion. Some people don't have to worry about things like that. Always directed at me. Always with that smile that wasn't really a smile. I let it go. People say things. Stress does things to people. Then his parents started coming around more. His mother and father drove up from Fayetteville every few weekends, and every visit stretched a little longer. One Friday night turned into a Saturday, then a Sunday. Then they were there for 4 days over Labor Day. Then 8 days around Thanksgiving. I watched the pattern, but again said nothing. Not my house, not my call. Last Christmas Eve changed that. My daughter had invited everyone to her home, a house I helped them purchase. I should say that plainly because it matters later. I'd provided the down payment as a wedding gift, $80,000. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't attach strings. I wanted them to have a real start. The deed was in both their names, as it should be. I arrived at 5 in the evening with a bottle of Malbec and a wrapped present for my grandson. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. My daughter hugged me at the door. My son-in-law nodded from across the room without getting up. His parents were already there, settled in like furniture. His mother was on the couch with her feet tucked under her and her shoes off, watching television at a volume I'd have associated with a movie theater. His father was at the kitchen table nursing a Bud Light and talking at my daughter while she tried to finish making dinner. Talking at, not with. I found my grandson in the playroom and spent a good 40 minutes on the floor, building something out of Lego. Best 40 minutes of the evening, as it turned out. Dinner was set for 7. We sat down. 6 adults, 1 5-year-old. The food was good. My daughter had made a crown roast and roasted potatoes and green beans with almonds. She'd been cooking since noon. You could tell. Somewhere around the second glass of wine, my son-in-law's father leaned across the table and asked if I'd ever thought about liquidating some of those properties. I set my glass down. "Excuse me." He said it again, more slowly this time, as if the problem had been my hearing. Had I ever considered selling off some of the portfolio? Because, he said, real estate was a young man's game, and at my age, cash was more flexible, more useful. More, he let the word hang in the air, shareable. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at her plate. I looked at my son-in-law. He was nodding. I said calmly that my portfolio was doing fine, and that I had a financial advisor I trusted. Thank you. His mother said, "It just seems like a lot for one person to manage." I said I had staff for that. My son-in-law said, "Dad," and that word "dad" landed like something dropped from a height. The casual entitlement of it. We've been talking, and we think it might make sense for my parents to come stay here more permanently. They need help. And honestly, this house is big enough. I said, "That's between you and your wife." My daughter said nothing. He said, "We were hoping you'd be supportive of that. Family takes care of family." I said, "Agreed. So your wife shouldn't have to cook for 6 people alone on Christmas Eve. That's family taking care of family too." The table went quiet. His mother said I was being hostile. I said I was being honest, which I understood some people found difficult to distinguish. That's when my son-in-law said it, told me to stay in my lane. In my daughter's house. At my daughter's table. With my daughter sitting 3 feet away looking at a roasted potato like it held the answers to the universe. I set down my fork. I looked at him. I smiled. And I excused myself to use the restroom. In the hallway, I took out my phone and made a call. Not to the police. Not yet. I called my attorney. He didn't answer. It was Christmas Eve. I left a message, and then I called my accountant, Howard, who picked up on the 3rd ring because Howard is constitutionally incapable of ignoring a phone. I said, "Howard, I need you to check something for me first thing Thursday morning, the deed on the Millbrook property, and pull the corporate account statements for the last 8 months. He said, "What am I looking for?" I said, "I'll tell you when I know." I had a feeling. That's the only way I can describe it. The same instinct that told me in 1997 that the contractor I'd hired was padding invoices, the same one that told me the tenant in Unit 14B was subletting illegally. A feeling with teeth. I went back to the table, finished my dinner, said goodnight, kissed my grandson, drove home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of decaf and opened my laptop and started going through things I should have looked at sooner. My business had one property, a small commercial space on Millbrook Road that I'd been meaning to refinance. I'd received some paperwork in the fall that seemed routine. I'd signed where the tabs were and mailed it back, without scrutinizing every page the way I once would have. Age and trust, 2 things that can make you sloppy. I pulled up the scanned copies from the cloud backup my office manager kept. The signature on page 11 was mine. The initials on page 7 were not. I looked at them for a long time. My initials are R.W.W. Raymond Webb. The initials on page 7 were cleaner, slightly rounder, and the W had an extra loop. It wasn't mine. I'd looked at my own handwriting for 6 decades. That wasn't mine. I kept looking. The refinancing had been arranged through a broker I'd never heard of. The loan proceeds, $220,000, had been directed to an account I didn't recognize. Not my business account. Not my personal account. An account I had never opened. I closed the laptop and sat with that for a while. Then I opened it again and pulled up the county recorder's website. It took me 20 minutes to find it. A quitclaim deed filed 11 weeks earlier, transferring the Millbrook property into an LLC I had never formed, never registered, never heard of, signed, apparently, by me. I was not asleep. I had not been drinking. I had not signed that document. My son-in-law had worked, briefly, in mortgage processing before he moved to marketing. He had mentioned it once, at a birthday dinner 2 years ago, as a throwaway line about a job he'd hated. I had filed it away without knowing why. Now I knew why. Thursday morning, Howard called me at 8:15. He had the account statements. There were 3 wire transfers from the corporate account. The one my son-in-law had co-signatory access to, which I had added him to 2 years ago when he'd briefly helped with some administrative work, and I had been, I will say it plainly, too trusting. The transfers totaled $47,000 over 6 months, all to the same receiving account. The same account that had received the refinancing proceeds. I called my attorney, Frank Delgado, at 8:30. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Raymond, don't touch anything. Don't move any money. Don't touch anything. Don't move any money. Don't call your son-in-law. Call me back in an hour." I called him back in an hour. He had already spoken to a colleague who specialized in financial fraud. They wanted to bring in a forensic accountant and, depending on what was found, potentially loop in the North Carolina Secretary of State's office and the Wake County DA. Frank said, "This is wire fraud, Raymond. Potentially bank fraud. Forged notarization on that quitclaim deed is a felony on its own. How deep do you want to go?" I said, "All the way." It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of quiet, no confrontation, no accusation, Christmas thank you cards sent like nothing was wrong. A birthday card for my son-in-law in January. A normal grandfather afternoon with my grandson at the Children's Museum in February. 6 weeks of sitting on what I knew while Frank and the forensic accountant built the case layer by layer. What they found was worse than I'd expected. The LLC my son-in-law had created, without my knowledge, using documents with forged signatures and a notary seal that turned out to be fabricated, had been used not just to redirect the Millbrook refinancing. It had also been listed as the guarantor on a personal loan his parents had taken out the previous spring. $240,000. The collateral listed was the Millbrook property, which at that point the LLC ostensibly controlled. His parents had known. The loan was in his father's name. The equity in my daughter's house, the one I had put $80,000 toward, had also been accessed. A home equity line of credit, opened 6 months earlier, co-signed by my son-in-law. My daughter's name was on it. She had told me later that she had signed documents she didn't fully read because he had told her it was routine refinancing, a lower rate, nothing to worry about. $31,000 had been drawn from that line. She didn't know where it had gone. I did not tell my daughter any of this until the morning of February 28th, 3 days before Frank and the investigative team were ready to move. I drove to her house at 9 in the morning a Tuesday while my son-in-law was at work. My grandson was at preschool. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where his father had asked me about liquidating my properties, and I laid it out for her. Everything. The forged initials. The LLC, the wire transfers, the HELOC, his parents' loan. She didn't cry right away. She sat very still for a long time and looked at her coffee cup. Then she said, "I noticed things. I told myself I was being paranoid." I said, "You weren't." She said, "What happens now?" I said, "Now you decide how much you want to know about what happens next. And then, whatever you decide, I'm going to support that." She sat there for another minute. Then she said, "I want to know everything." I told her. On March 2nd, my son-in-law came home from work at 6:15 in the evening and found 2 detectives from the Wake County Sheriff's Office waiting in the living room. Frank was there. I was there. My daughter was there, sitting in the chair by the window with her arms crossed and her face absolutely still. He looked at me first. Not at the detectives, not at Frank, at me. I didn't say anything. The lead detective, a woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, said his name and told him he was being detained for questioning in connection with wire fraud, bank fraud, and forgery in the second degree. She told him he could call an attorney. He looked at my daughter. She looked out the window. His parents were detained separately that same evening, his father at their apartment in Fayetteville. The warrant had been coordinated. The forensic accountant's report went to the DA's office the following week. Frank told me the forgery charges alone carried up to 3 years. The wire fraud, given the amounts involved, was a federal matter. The FBI had been looped in during the final 2 weeks, quietly, without my son-in-law having any idea. There were civil remedies, too. Frank filed the civil suit in parallel to recover the $47,000 from the corporate account, to unwind the fraudulent LLC and restore the Millbrook deed, and to address the HELOC. It took most of the year to resolve. There were court dates and continuances and a plea negotiation that Frank said was, all things considered, reasonable. My son-in-law pleaded guilty to 2 counts of forgery and 1 count of wire fraud. He received 3 years of supervised probation, full restitution, and a permanent record that would follow him for the rest of his professional life. His parents settled the civil matter separately. Every dollar was repaid with interest and legal fees. My daughter filed for divorce in April. She did it herself, with her own attorney, and she was measured and clear-eyed throughout. The house was awarded to her. The HELOC was folded into the divorce settlement and addressed in full. She's been in therapy since March and tells me it's helping. My grandson still calls me on Sunday afternoons. We still do Lego sometimes, on the floor of my living room, him directing and me following instructions. He is 6 now. He has his mother's laugh. Last Sunday, he showed me a drawing he'd made of our house, his mom's house, with a big yellow sun and a smaller house next to it, which he said was my house, so we'd always be close. I have it on my refrigerator. There is something I want to say clearly, because I have had 6 months to think about it. I am not proud that it took me as long as it did to trust my instincts. I am not proud that I added a man I barely knew to a business account because I wanted to be generous, because I wanted to believe in the family my daughter had built. I made it easier for him than it should have been. But I am also not going to spend what's left of my life carrying guilt that belongs to someone else. I signed documents without reading them closely enough. He forged the ones he couldn't get me to sign. Those are 2 very different things. One is a lesson. The other is a crime. I sat in my lane the whole time. He's the one who crossed the line. I still think about that Christmas Eve dinner sometimes. The crown roast. The almond green beans. My grandson somewhere in the back room stacking Lego bricks while the adults at the table were doing something far less innocent. What strikes me most, looking back, isn't the anger. It's how long I gave the benefit of the doubt to someone who had already decided I was a resource to be managed, not a person to be respected. I kept quiet at dinners. I filed away the comments. I told myself that generosity was the right posture, that a man who'd built something from nothing owed it to his family to be open-handed. And I was right about that, up to a point. The mistake wasn't being generous. The mistake was confusing generosity with the suspension of judgment. There's a difference between trusting people and stopping paying attention. I stopped paying attention. My son-in-law counted on that. Here's what I've come to believe. The way things turn out is almost never random. Bradley didn't stumble into fraud. He built toward it, one small test at a time. A comment about my portfolio here, a request for account access there. A document slid under my nose at just the right moment. He was reading me the whole time, learning where I was careless, where I was sentimental, where I wanted badly enough to believe something that I wouldn't look too closely at the evidence. Every action he took was a consequence of decisions both of us had made. Mine out of trust, his out of something else entirely. What stopped it wasn't luck. It was that feeling at the dinner table, the one I almost talked myself out of. The instinct that said something is wrong here. I've learned to treat that instinct like a smoke detector. You don't ignore a smoke detector because the house looks fine from where you're standing. I called Howard. I called Frank. I sat in my kitchen at midnight reading documents most people would have found incomprehensible. 31 years of running a business gave me just enough knowledge to recognize what didn't belong. That knowledge didn't come from talent. It came from decades of showing up and doing the work, even when it was tedious, even when it wasn't glamorous, even when I would rather have been anywhere else. The late nights spent learning contracts and financing structures and the mechanics of property law. I didn't know I was preparing for this. But I was. My daughter asked me once, during the long months of the legal process, how I stayed so calm through all of it. I told her the truth. I wasn't always calm. There were nights when the weight of what had happened, what had nearly happened, sat on my chest like something physical. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was the realization that someone I had welcomed into my family had looked at that welcome and seen an opening. But I also knew that falling apart wasn't going to get the deed back. It wasn't going to unwind the wire transfers or protect my daughter's house. The only thing that was going to do any of that was staying steady, staying sharp, and trusting the people I had deliberately built relationships with over many years. An attorney who answered on Christmas Eve. An accountant who picked up the phone because he always picks up the phone. Those relationships didn't appear out of nowhere either. They were the result of decades of being someone worth calling back. I have the drawing my grandson made on my refrigerator. 2 houses, a big yellow sun. He drew it because he wanted us to always be close. 6 years old, and he already understands something that took his father 30-some years to get wrong. That the people around you aren't assets to be leveraged. They're just people, and how you treat them, quietly, consistently, over a long period of time, is exactly what comes back to you in the end. I sat in my lane the whole time. He's the one who crossed the line.